Hi, this is Anita from 5 Minutes with Art. Today we're going to talk a little bit about pop art, and in particular, pop art. Today we're going to talk a little bit about pop art, and in particular, pop art's relationship to abstract expressionism art. The pop art movement started in the United Kingdom and the United States, and it was to some extent a reaction to abstract expressionism. Pop art began to emerge in the 1950s and flourished in the 1960s. But the main thing about pop art is that pop art was inspired by popular culture, commercialization, and mass advertising. Pop art was There was really no love lost between pop art and abstract expressionism. In fact, many of the abstract expressionism painters were known to make very negative comments about the pop artists. They didn't think they were really artists at all. They thought it was kind of a gimmick. It wasn't really, any type of art. They just saw them, taking commercialized things like the Campbell's soup can or other things and just putting it up and calling it art. So really there was not this love lost at all between these two groups because they were actually very, very different looks and very different types of art. But you have to remember that one of the things about pop art is pop art, just like abstract expressionism, saw that the world was shifting. The art center of the world was shifting from Paris, was shifting to New York, to the United States. Pop art also was showing a shift was taking place within the world. And this actually was kind of this cultural shift was taking place. And here's a few things to remember about what was happening in the United States at the time, particularly in the 1960s. There was new wars. The world had just come out of, World War II. There had been the Korean War, but in particular, there was the very unpopular Vietnam War, or what was known as the Vietnam conflict. Rock and roll became a new style of music that was inspired by the African American blues. And it began to be the popular type of music among teenagers and others. There became this real change in values, not only music, but the American culture, which, had things to do with religion, sex, and race. Women started to get an education, started to work outside the home. There was a civil rights movement was happening in America where there was, all the civil rights. We had the many racial conflicts that were going on. There was the entire hippie movement that was taking place in the 60s, which were breaking down many of the traditional values that people were used to having. Love, sex, and rock and roll was the term that was used as part of the sort of new American culture that was taking place. Television started becoming popular. People were having televisions in their home and were able to watch the TV. And they were able to watch many, different types of popular shows. Movie stars like Marilyn Monroe, became very popular and others like that. And actually, Marilyn Monroe is that very famous, was very famously, shown as in some of the pop art. Advertising became important, suddenly where people didn't have advertising so much. Advertising now started becoming more like this art form. It was this new form of advertising was shown everywhere, which actually was a kind of new form of art. People had more disposable income than they've ever had before. There was a rising middle class that was taking place. So people had time for leisure activities, which they'd never had before. So this became, part of this popular, culture's consumption. Everyone was consuming this, popular culture. And there was civil disobedience was going on everywhere. So pop art was all about using, images from the, that was popular and advertised and other things. And it was basically like a commercialization of culture. It was showing, that there were, that basically this commercialization was everywhere. So even though abstract expressionism overlapped with pop art movement, and even though there could be some significance between them, there's also a lot of differences. But the main thing that most people agree to is that pop art was a reaction to abstract expressionism. But both of the art movements showed that the world was rapidly changing. This is Anita from 5 Minutes with Art. We hope you've enjoyed this podcast. And if you'd like to learn more about pop art and abstract expressionism, we have a blog. We'll put a link below in our description. We'd like to thank those that help make our podcast possible. And also, if you get a chance, we'd love to have you follow and be part of our community. Thank you so much for listening.